Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jason Tucker, and this is WPwatercooler's WPblab. This is episode number 94. Today's topic is exploring the ethics of marketing with our friend Morten Rand-Hendriksen. Before we get around to introducing him, we're going to introduce ourselves because we like to be rude and introduce ourselves. Bridget, take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am a marketing consultant, and you can find out more at bridgetwillard.com. I'm also the co-host of this awesome show and team rep for marketing on Make WordPress.
Team rep. Woo! Team rep. I am not a team rep. My name is Jason Tucker. You can find me over at Jason Tucker on Twitter. My website is jasontucker.blog, where I write a bunch of stuff over there. We do 2 different shows on WP Watercooler Network. This show right here that happens at 7 o'clock on Thursdays. And we also do WP Watercooler, which is the network's name as well. And you go over to WPwatercooler.com and you can look at all that stuff over there. That happens on Fridays at 11 o'clock a.m. Pacific. All right, we've been rude. Morten, tell us about yourself.
Hello, I am
how's it going?
Morten. I'm a senior staff instructor with LinkedIn Learning and lynda.com. And in a previous life, before I started working on the web, I was a philosopher. So somehow those 2 things have now merged together again. It's like this very long, curving thing where the 2 tracks just meet at the end.
Crazy. What was that like your field of study or what?
Yeah, I went to university. Well, when I was finished high school, I couldn't figure out what to do. So I had, where I come from, you're guaranteed a spot at a university, but not necessarily where you want. It depends on your grades. So I made a list, and it was like, I said technical cybernetics and
That sounds like a religion.
philosophy and astrophysics in that order. And then technical cybernetics had like 10 spots for the whole country. So I did not get that. And then I got the next one, which was philosophy. And then I spent a lot of time at university studying philosophy.
So if you weren't a philosopher, you would have been an astrophysicist?
No, a technical cybernetics is essentially
what was after
robots.
Like, you didn't
that
get
was
the
astrophysics,
first one.
yeah.
Astrophysics, you would have been telling us about mega black holes.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So we don't want to talk about Gutenberg today, though. So let's talk about ethics in marketing. That was a joke, everybody. Haha. So, okay. So here's
Too soon, Bridget. It's too soon.
know, right? I know. So we know about legality and morality, and like for the people that don't have like a firm definition of ethics, could you just lay that out, like ethics 101 in 155 characters, that kind of a thing? Give us a meta description of ethics.
There are 2 terms you hear all the time, right? You have ethics and then you have morals. And if you look at it from a theoretical perspective, they're actually the same thing, just 2 different aspects of the same thing. So you often make a differentiation between them, saying that morals is an internalized understanding of right and wrong, whereas ethics is a human definition of systems that you use to define what is right or wrong, right? So you can say, for example, everyone intrinsically knows it's not right to take a life, for instance, right? You don't go out stabbing people because that just, everyone knows there's something off about it, so it is morally wrong to do. If you make a law around it and you justify the law, you have used ethics to make that law to support the morals. Now,
so morals is internal, ethics is external. So like back end, front end.
They're 2 sides of the same coin, but we often make those distinctions to make it clear what we're talking about. Now, to confuse matters, if you look at ethical theory, you're looking at moral traditions, right? So like consequentialism, for instance, which is an ethical theory, is a moral tradition. So
it's also
the words are used like mixed.
Right?
Yeah, so the words are used and mixed together often. And when people like me who spent too much time at university looking at ethics and morals start talking to people who spend their time better doing other things, there's often a disconnect in understanding the terminology itself. So, for instance, the other day I was arguing with someone on Twitter happens occasionally about the ethics of crypto mining as a thing that you put on your website. And I said that crypto mining is a good example of why the web design industry needs ethics. Now, and the response I got was, you can't paint everyone with the same brush, to say like you're implying that no one in the web design industry has ethics. And I said, no. I'm using the term ethics differently. What I mean is, we don't have an ethics, like a defined set of rules that we use to figure out what is right and what is wrong and how we do things. Whereas what you're understanding when I say ethics is, I am doing wrong things all the time. So there are two very different things. So in this conversation, when I talk about ethics, I'm talking about the rules that we create to allow us to judge individual actions, to see whether or not they are justifiable in a moral context.
So like brand standards, or like if you code in a WordPress way, you're looking at the codex. That is your context for the decision making. Yeah. Okay. I mean, like, we like to relate it to our audience. Like, not everybody.
That's a good analogy, right? And then you can add an ethics on top of that and say, why don't people in the WordPress community copy other people's themes and then just give them out under their own name? Right? There's no practical reason why you don't do that. There's nothing that stops you. The GPL explicitly says you can. Yet it's not something you do. It is uncalled for and frowned upon and all these things. So here we're in ethics territory, right? Where it's like, people have this intrinsic understanding that you don't just take other people's stuff and claim it's yours, even when you can. Because doing so would cause problems, right? And that stems from an ethical theory called
just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, this is deontology. So deontology or duty ethics comes into play here. You have Kant's categorical imperative, which says, translated into something meaningful, would be something like, in every act you perform, do the thing you believe every other person in the same situation should be doing. So it's a little bit different from the what is it called? The golden principle?
The golden rule, do unto
golden
others.
rule, because the golden rule says do unto others as you want them to do to you, right? Whereas the Kant's categorical imperative says act as if you want your act to be a universal law, meaning this is how every other person in that same situation should always behave. So when you start looking at the way we make decisions in the real world, you'll see that a lot of it is rooted in ethics. We're just not labeling it as such.
Right. That's more like the law that says every action has an equal
and opposite reaction.
Right. So that the thing is that we like to react instead of respond, because we're just doing stuff. So this is a good segue though, talking about copying themes, because I used to work at Give. And people would say, what am I paying for if you're not allowed to break it? Well, I could just fork it, or because then we'd say, well, you're paying for the support and the upgrades, right? Mm-hmm. And so the development and marketing, I know a lot of people don't like to think it, but really there's so much intertwined. When you build something and release it to the world, you will have some level of marketing, which is why we have this show. So I kind of like, when I know that you talk about grid and CSS accessibility and Gutenberg and all of that a lot. But when I started seeing a lot of your ethical tweets, I was like, you know what? We need to talk about this, ethics, because it does matter, especially as you start scaling your company or as you release this thing into the world. Like, what kind of a responsibility do you have?
Mm-hmm. So I know that you probably have a bunch of things that you're like, is this okay? Should I be doing this? Right? You probably have things in your head, and Jason has too, and everyone in the chat has that, and people who are listening to this will have that too. So what I want to do is say, first of all, there's a common misunderstanding that ethics provides you a list of do's and don'ts. It doesn't. That is dogmatic moralism. is when someone imposes on you some sort of set of rules you must follow under all circumstances. And dogmatic moralism works only when the people who are involved agree to say, like, this thing is this thing is right or this thing is wrong just because some authority says it, right? And you see that in laws. Laws are dogmatic moralism. You say you don't steal your neighbor's horse because the law says you can't. Even if you need your neighbor's horse, you don't steal it because then there are consequences, right? That's not what ethics does. Ethics gives you the tools to at least attempt to think through the decisions you make before you turn the decision into an act, to see what the consequences are. So what I want to do is give you a tiny toolkit and then see if you can use it right now to answer your own questions. How about that?
That sounds
Perfect.
like a philosopher talking. That's
Ooh, we're going to set the universal law right now. This is awesome.
Yeah. So the toolkit, this is something I've put together to try to make ethics make sense in a tech context. And what I've done is taken 4 moral philosophies and found the key parts of them and then put them in a chain. And it's almost like a bridge. So if you can imagine, you can travel in both directions on the bridge, and it depends on what you're doing. So if you're judging an existing thing, you would travel from one end to the other. And if you're judging a new thing that you're going to create, then you travel in the opposite direction. And if we say that we take something that already exists in the world and you want to judge whether or not it needs to be redone, then you would go in the direction of consequentialism, deontology, virtue ethics, and capability approach. So these are the 4 theories. And if you go in the other direction, so you say, I have an idea and I want to test it, then you say capability approach first, then virtue ethics, then deontology, and then finally consequentialism. I'll have to explain what that means because otherwise it's just confusing. So if we take the example of cryptomining, it's on my mind right now. So for those of you who don't know, there's this new thing that's happening on the web. It's been happening for about a year now, but it's become a very big thing right within the last week. There are a couple of companies that offer up the ability for you as a web developer or site owner to embed a piece of code on your site that runs in the computer of the visitor. And that code then uses the processing power of the computer from the visitor to mine for a cryptocurrency and sends the money back to me. So it's a way of earning money when people visit your site.
But mining, that word implies taking.
Work. Yeah, and it is. Work. You're taking the processing power. So electricity, resources, everything from the visitor computer and using that resource to turn it into money for you, right, as a site owner. So that's the premise. And then we say, okay, so we're going to, since this already exists, we'll go from consequentialism through to capability approach. And then the first question is, for consequentialism, you're looking at what are the consequences of your actions and whether or not those consequences improve the common good. So in consequentialism, you usually say that you're looking at the utility and whether utility is maximized, meaning you're taking everyone who's affected by this decision. And then you say, is the overall utility improved? Meaning it's okay if some people are disadvantaged as long as the majority are advantaged by this, right? And then you can say with crypto mining, the person who is advantaged by crypto mining is the person at the end of the chain who gets the money. Every other person is disadvantaged by this. So it's a very clear-cut case of, well, consequentialism would probably say don't do this. So then you say, okay, well, maybe I still want to do it and I'm okay with that because you're, earning money and a transaction like that usually is that kind of situation. So then we move on and you say, okay, what's the next step? The next step is deontology or duty ethics. And duty ethics says, like I explained before, you have to perform acts that you would want every other person to perform in the same situation. And you're doing so out of duty to that rule. So you're not just doing it because it's the right thing to do. You actually believe that this is something that we should be doing. And when you look at duty ethics and this crypto mining situation, it becomes very quickly obvious that you should never do this, because if you put a crypto miner on your site, you're giving everyone else a license to do the same thing. And if everyone in the world put a crypto miner on their site, the web would stop working. Like, honestly, everything would just grind to a halt immediately.
But
right?
What if you're like salon.com and you have it on the screen that it tells you we're going to crypto mine your the site, like that sort of thing? That's a part that kind of blew me. I don't know if you've heard about that or not.
Yeah. So that's what we'll get to next.
Okay. Cool.
So if you look at crypto mining as a script that just runs in the background of the site that the user is not aware of, then it fails at deontology, because you say you don't want everyone to do this, because it's not only is it something that would just stop the internet from working, but equally important, when you're failing at your duty of care to the end user. So you have a duty of care to anyone who interacts with your designs, because there's no reasonable expectation that they should know everything that's going on. They're going to a site to get information. They have no reasonable expectation of having a script running on their computer and using up all their resources, right? So unless you explicitly say to people, I am doing this, then you're failing at the deontology step. If you're forcing people to do this, you're kind of also failing, because then you're in this weird territory. But that's where deontology starts falling apart. So then we move on to the next step, which is virtue ethics. And in virtue ethics, you're looking at what kind of person you become by performing an act. And the idea is, this is the oldest of these theories, the idea is a human can become virtuous only by behaving like a virtuous person. So you define yourself a set of virtues you want to aspire to, and then behave like a person who had those virtues in an attempt to become that person, or become virtuous. And in this crypto mining example, you would then ask yourself, do I want to become the kind of person who does this, right? And do I want everyone else to become the kind of person who does this? And is this the type of person that I would want everyone to be? Which is a really tricky question, because it depends on your particular, understanding of the world and everything. But it is a valid question that you need to ask, right? So let's say you say the consequentialism thing is fine because I need to earn money. The deontology thing kind of falls apart because I'll put a button that says, click on this to mine currency for me. And if you don't get to read my content. So you make it into a paywall. And you're okay with being the kind of person who does this, which is absolutely fine. You can choose that. That's not a problem. Then we get to the capability approach. And this is kind of the trick with this whole thing, right? Because everyone knows about consequentialism. Everyone knows about duty ethics. Everyone knows about virtue ethics. Capability approach is a relatively new theory. It came about around the mid-70s, and it's only now really becoming something people take seriously. And capability approach says the morality of an act has to be judged based on what capabilities it grants the person acted upon. So when you're looking at a person, if I perform an act, like say I partake in this podcast right now, I am granting you, person who listens to the podcast, the capability of understanding what I'm talking about better. And then you can take that and use it to ostensibly improve your life, right? So I would argue that under the capability approach, me partaking in this podcast and you people putting this podcast on in the first place has increases the capability of the people who watch it. Therefore, you are doing something that's morally right. The reason why capability approach matters here is because if we start looking at decisions based on not on what we get out of them, but what we're doing to the end user, you can easily start asking questions like, what type of world am I building by doing this? And is that world a world that benefits the people that I'm acting upon, right? So when you make any decision, you are making a decision on behalf of the people who visit your site. And you have to consider, what is the future I'm building for that person by doing this? And if you put a crypto miner on your site, you're building a future where things stop working, right? So if you follow this thing and you agree with all of my judgments, which you don't have to, this is a toolkit and I'm using the toolkit from my perspective right now, then I would say that cryptocurrency fails. But the point of this is that's my personal moral judgment based on these theories. It is not an absolute truth that needs to be imposed on everyone. What these tools do is they open up a platform of discussion for all the people involved, right?
Right, the framework.
So, yeah, and it's a framework. So the framework looks like this. There are 4 questions you ask. The first question is, what kind of world am I building for the end user? The second question is, who do I become by doing this? The third question is, do I want every other person to do the same thing in the same circumstance? And the fourth question is, am I increasing the overall utility for everyone by doing this? And then you start from the utility section if you have an existing thing. You start from the what world am I building if you're starting with something new. And it's a good little mnemonic thing that you can have in your head because the questions are easy enough. And if you then say any decision you make, you just run through this and actually have a conversation about each of these 4, you'll be able to think about it in an ethical context and actually think through what you're really doing before you make a decision, rather than just saying, put the button on right now. We need money, right? So what are the questions you, what is the marketing issue you want to know?
Well, I mean, like, okay, so now you gave us the framework of the discussion. You just want to skate out of the show early. I see what's really happening here.
No, I actually want to see how you use it.
So, I mean, I feel like you're the dad that answers a question with a question, or the old Jewish scholar who answers questions with questions, which is good if you're running for office. But like, so I love this though, because in a world where we're giving away our intellectual property in open source, right? And Roy and James in the chat know when I first started the show, I was like, what are you guys doing? This is how you make money. I would never do this. I was a musician, as a songwriter, as a writer with published work. Why are you giving away your intellectual property? That's all you have. And so, well, now I'm like an open source lover, hippie person. Okay. So in marketing a product, a lot of times there's kind of backroom deals. There's a lot of ghost writing and influencer marketing. Like, I know, like, I feel like every question you're just going to ask that. I don't want to call anybody out, but like in the,
I love this. I
love it. like, an influencer marketing especially is kind of, and affiliate marketing is kind of like the shady side of marketing on the internet. For the lack of a better term, that is super judgmental. And I don't mind doing that because I think it's good for the common good. I'm fine with everybody having that way of thinking. And what were the other questions? Because it's going to be yes. Like I am a dogmatic person by nature. I have no problem with dogma. So what kind of a world am I building better? Because I decided it's better. Like, you know what I mean? Like I have no problem with that. But I know a lot of people
for the end user.
For the end user, right? Yeah. So okay, so
pick one thing. Pick a thing. Pick a marketing thing that you do that you feel like needs to be looked at closer.
How about this? We're sending out a weekly email. How about that? Let's start with that one. That's simple enough, right?
Yeah, but so that's kind of.
It's like the person chose to sign up for it, and you send them an email. But well, how about if you refuse to remove them when they request to be removed? That would be right.
So that would break a couple of laws. We don't really need to discuss that.
Well, like, people review products. How about this?
Yes, that's a good
example. That's a good one. Okay. That's a good one.
Product reviews, and you're paid to do it. You're supposed to disclose by law. You're supposed to disclose from the FCC in America. I don't know what the rest of the world has to do.
Same.
Okay, fine.
It's probably the FCC as well, right?
What if you ghostwrite the article yourself for the influencer to post?
Okay, so why are you ghostwriting it for yourself rather than have an actual user do it?
That's what I'm saying.
No, why? I need you to say it out loud. Why are you doing it?
Because I'm better than they are.
I'm a better writer. I know my product better. I know my product better. They don't know the product. They're just an influencer.
They're going to mess it
I can
up.
write it better than they can.
Yeah.
Now I sound like an asshole.
So what you're no. What you're describing is what there's an entire economy of influencers based on this exact premise. So it's worth discussing, right? So if you look at it this way, there are a bunch of pieces that you need to dig deeper into. One is, what is the value of providing, like getting an influencer to say something in the first place?
Because you think their word either has more reach or more authority than your own.
And why do they have more authority?
Because people give that authority to them.
Oh, sorry, that was a poorly phrased question. What is the value of their authority?
It's monetary.
No,
it's all monetary. Everything's money. It's just money. It's just power, money, and sex.
Kevin Hoffman is correct.
Social proof. But social proof is about money.
Yeah. Well,
there's only three things that motivate you from a psychological standpoint: sex, money, and power. And power is like can be paired with either one of them. Mm-hmm. So social proof, and hi, Kevin Hoffman, love you. But social proof is only valuable if the company or the person with the social proof gets money.
Yes. So what I'm trying to get at is the reason why you're getting an influencer to talk about a product is because the influencer has the ability to influence their followers. Right? So if I'm an influencer and I say this particular brand of hot dogs is much better than the other brand, then people are more likely to buy that brand, whether or not it's true, right? So,
but not you, because you're not a hot dog guy.
So
I don't care what kind of hot dogs you eat. That's not your thing. So.
According to Clout, I am an influencer in sandwiches, which I don't understand.
Is Clout still a thing? I must be still stuck at 65. Okay, continue.
Yeah, okay. So
my tip of the week is Clout.
You're getting an influencer to talk about a product because you want the influencer to literally influence other people, right?
Yes.
Right.
The reason why people are influenced by that person is there's a myriad of factors, but it might be because they trust this person and their judgment, right? Now, if you then, someone else writes content on behalf of that influencer and gives them says, you say this, then the content is presented as if it comes from one person, but it's actually not. It's coming from somewhere else, which means that the entire trust value falls apart. Then you have to ask yourself, what is your duty of care to the end user here? Because if you have a duty of care to be honest, then you can't do this, right? Because there's no honesty in that unless it specifically says ghost written by the brand itself, in which case the entire value falls out, right? And then the pushback would be something like, but the influencer doesn't know anything about the product. At which point an ethics person like me would say, in that case, the influencer shouldn't say anything about the product, because the reason why they're influential is because people trust them. And if you take away that trust by giving them content and basically allowing them to misrepresent themselves and misrepresent their own authority, then the entire thing just falls apart. And you see it from time to time that some influencer is called out on basically just saying garbage all the time, right? They're just spewing press release data without giving any disclaimers, and then they lose their followings.
Right. It's the Milli Vanilli effect.
Yeah. So
do you remember what a big deal that was when we were all kids, you guys?
Yeah, I do. It was crazy.
That's what I'm saying. Like before that, there was tons of people that were lip syncing. Mm-hmm. Right. So like what was that famous movie with Audrey Hepburn, where the rain in Spain is always plainly in the main or something like that? My Fair Lady.
Yes, right.
Okay, she sang in the movie, but that was not her voice. Mm-hmm. We all thought it was her, and it was overdubbed. You know what I'm saying? So like that, I'm this person and having a stunt actor has been done in other industries for a long, long time. So how is that different?
But if you're upfront about it, right?
Yeah.
Milli Vanilli was not upfront about it.
and
But like,
they
you know,
are no
somebody
longer
like
in
T-Pain or one of those
existence because of
people
it.
what doesn't
Right.
they don't know how to sing, but they use like auto-tune to like sing. You know they're using auto-tune. And they even sound like robots. They're not being, you know. So
Okay, so right
Darn.
now, in
Yeah.
a more of a software vein, I'm
Right.
not. Sorry, it's my job to be funny. We can't be serious all the time. So it's just like people will stop watching and be like, "Oh my gosh." So, but I would love to sit down with you with coffee and talk about humanism and this construct. That would be like a dream. Okay, but it's not the show. So
We'll do that some other time.
You're making software right now in the WordPress space. There's this big giant kind of issue with your software is or is not 100% GPL compliant. You can't sponsor a WordCamp if your product isn't 100%. Like, so in that rule, BridgetWiller.com would not be able to sponsor WordCamp Jacksonville because I don't have a product that's 100% GPL compliant because I'm writing content that I protect with my intellectual property. I don't know. I'm a ghostwriter for Twitter, right? So like that's not something that falls under that construct. So like how is the ethics in that situation? Like is that not a moral crisis, that's the phrase, but an ethical crisis within WordPress as a project and a community?
I think specifically around this GPL debate, we're butting up against this. One of the classic problems with several ethical or moral philosophies, which is this: someone has to make decisions about, like for consequentialism, someone has to make a decision about who is affected and who is not, and how do we make measurements about utility in this circumstance, right? In deontology, you say, okay, so great, everyone wants to do the right thing, but under which circumstances and what is actually the right thing? And how do we actually say whether or not, is this something that should be done in all circumstances or not? Becomes a very subjective decision. Like there are lots of people in the world who, when I say cryptocurrency is bad, no, crypto mining is bad, they'll be like, no, it's not. It's fine. I don't have any problem with it. I think everyone should do this. Right. And in virtue ethics, someone has to decide what are the virtues and how do you get to them and how do you behave like a virtuous person. And in capability approach, someone has to decide what are the capabilities. So what's happening in the GPL debate is someone, Matt Mullenweg, has made a bunch of these decisions. So he has defined that under the WordPress umbrella, the rule of law is GPL 100% compliant, or you are in violation of our internal ethics, right? And that's something that we are granting him license to do by virtue of following along. So it's an interesting phenomenon in open source because you have this whole concept of the benevolent dictator and all that stuff. Pretty much the entire pyramid stands and falls on whether or not we are willing to accept this premise. Because if we walk away from it and we say, actually, no, you can let other license it, then the whole thing falls apart almost immediately, right? Same with whether or not people can have, I've been in several discussions about whether or not you can put WordPress in a domain name. People say, I don't understand why that's a problem. Well, the problem, of course, is if you allow that, then someone will buy every WordPress domain name in the world and just make an entire market out of it. So
it's like this, right, Morten? Like this is only worth $1 because we claim that it's worth $1, and we've all gotten together and said this thing's worth $1. So let's continue to make sure that this thing is worth that much money.
Well,
right. I mean, that's that whole idea. So the idea,
and that's why some economies fail, because people lose trust in the currency, right? So I would say that the WordPress community, by and large, stands and falls on whether or not people are willing to buy into this concept of GPL and GPL absolutism, which is what we have. Right? Well, and WordPress has a more extreme version of GPL absolutism than I think we see anywhere else because of how far it reaches. So it reaches beyond just stuff you put into the WordPress
Right.
theme repository, or whether or not you can submit code into Track. It also extends to whether or not you can give money to an event so that they can buy more food, right?
Right. And here's the thing, like that is a huge opportunity for WordPress companies to spend their marketing budget. Like, because this is still about marketing, right? So like if I wanted, and also giving back to the community, right? Because I literally was like, oh, $175 and I could sponsor Jacksonville. That, you know, I love those people over there. I'm not going to go, but I could do that. But I'm not I didn't try. But when I saw this GPL stuff, I'm like, well, you know what I'm saying? Like, and, you know, TV episodes for WordPress TV being taken down because so-and-so isn't blah, 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 blah. So,
Yep.
Okay, so if you merge your conversation on ethics and your framework, Morten, with the law of infusion of innovation, and then you say, okay, so WordPress, when we were small, that was fine because that's all of us doing it. But now we have X amount of WordCamps and meetups and you know, and the constant amount of money isn't that much. It's not scaling. The amount of money to spend sponsoring WordCamps and meetups is not scaling to the same degree as the amount of money needed to sponsor said meetups and WordCamps, because they are growing exponentially. And on top of that, WordPress as a software and as a community is growing. We are way in the early majority, about to go over to the late majority. So as we allow second career folks, all these other people to come into our community, that they don't necessarily are ever going to be these dogmatic 100% compliant people. What happens when the amount of sponsors, that finite amount of budget is gone? What happens to the infrastructure we build on that?
That is a very complicated question.
let's go back to the list of four.
Well, I'm just saying, like, so is it benefiting the good of the whole community? Because
exactly.
if there is no money to spend on a WordCamp, or it becomes more expensive, then a smaller agency can't even get in because a booth is not at $1,200 anymore. Now it's $7,500. So now you made it much more difficult to get to that, something that was meant to be, you know, kind of equally shared with the budget. Is now those numbers keep going up. I saw it the whole 2 years I was at Give. Those numbers went up, 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 up. And then it's really hard to get in. And if you don't have enough people, so then as it scales, does the answer to the question change? That's a smaller version.
So this is precisely why ethics is complicated, because you have to first of all, every single person who is in a conversation like this will have a slightly different viewpoint, because we're all different people. We're not the same machine. We're all different installs on this big virtual environment that we pretend is reality or whatever. So in an ethical conversation, if it's a good ethical conversation, you will often come up with, you can't agree 100% on anything. What you end up with is you touch on all the pain points enough that people are satisfied with the decisions that are made and that the negative consequences have been accounted for. That becomes difficult in a situation where you have someone who lays down the law, as they say, and just say, like, there is an absolute truth here, and that is GPL 100% all the time, no exceptions, because there's a lack of discussion. Now, this in the context we're talking about here, there is an actual discussion ongoing about this and how militant we should be in enforcing this GPL absolutist rule. And I think that conversation would benefit from stepping back a bit and looking at the larger ramifications of the entire situation, which is what you're doing. Which is to say, if we just start over and say, let's say WordPress, we're just going to redefine the WordPress philosophy starting right now, and we're not going to take into account the history of WordPress, because WordPress now is so fundamentally different from what it was before, right? So we'll just say, start over. Then you start by saying, what capabilities should we grant the end user, and how do those capabilities help them improve their lives? Right? And then there's a bunch of things that will come in. Like, for instance, one of the big values of WordPress is that it's free and that it's open and that anyone can work with it. And that if you go to the WordPress theme directory, you know that you're not going to get a virus. And if you go to the plugin directory, you're not going to get some garbage that will destroy your site. And there are all these components to it, right? So then you can formulate some sort of overall idea of what are the capabilities that we are aiming to grant to people. We define how those capabilities will help improve their lives, and then we can move on. And in the WordPress philosophy, you kind of have that in the whole democratized publishing, because what you're saying is we are granting the capability of online publishing to anyone who has an internet connection, which is a great ethical framework to start with, right? Then you go on to say, okay, what type of people do we want to be here? And that's where it gets really tricky, because if you buy into the open source philosophy, hook, line, and sinker, then the type of person you want to be is the type of person that just writes code or makes designs and releases them into the world, and people can use them however they want. However, you also want to be the kind of person who is not living on the street and is not dead, right? Because you need to eat and you need shelter and all these things.
That plugin.
So your well-being has value to the community, and your ability to live a healthy life and all these things have value to the community. So you have to aspire to this open source ideal while at the same time living a normal life. So you then have to start balancing and figuring out how does this work and where does the money come from? And then you go on to the ontology and look at what are your duties of care to the end user, under what circumstances can you do things like, say, have split licensing, and how do you communicate the split licensing properly to people so they understand what they're buying into, which is really tricky, because if we go down the path of saying split licensing is okay and you can still sponsor these events, then there has to be a way for anything that has a split license to be able to explain what that means to an end user in such a way that they will understand it right away without having to make any extra effort. Right? Because your duty of care to the end user is that they should be able to just click on a button and install the thing and should not be concerned about anything. There shouldn't be any surprises. There shouldn't be a crypto miner inside the plugin, right?
Right.
Finally, you get to the consequentialism part, which is just to say, are these decisions improving the overall common good, which is what you were addressing, right? Because if the absolutism of saying GPL for all, nothing else, is actually holding back the utility of the tool or decreasing the utility of the tool in some way, then there is a problem there that needs to be resolved. How exactly that would be resolved, I can't say. But you see how if you use these tools, you get into a much deeper discussion where you can pinpoint different main problems, and then you can dive deeper and figure out, okay, so how do we solve these problems? Are we going to put them to the side or not? Who is impacted if we do? How do we plan for resolving them later? You're basically building up a larger foundation of thinking around your decision making, rather than just saying, I believe in GPL, I don't, because that's what's happening right now. People are very they're very what do you call it, partisan about it. There's no there's little deep discussion about the actual consequences and the broader ideals that are going on here.
Because if the overall WordPress community suffers because of that, then the answer changes. And just to bring it back to the small businesses, I feel like actually I feel like the tool tip of the week is the framework. Because seriously,
I thought it was asking random people to fix your site.
Right. I know. Not everybody can DM Jeff at Pixel Jar and say, I really want this to happen in WPblab. Can you fix it? Jeff Zinn is not a scalable tool or tip of the week, but thanks, Jeff. So here's the thing. Like, now I'm thinking and I'm wondering, maybe those 4 questions are the questions that need to be answered in brand standards documents and companies' marketing briefs when they do product development.
And everything else all the time.
No,
for
I mean,
everything
like
we do.
No, I mean in every department. I know, but like this is, I mean, as much as I would love to continue this conversation, just in a hypothetical, because that's epic. I love this. This is the my favorite
Yeah,
thing.
what were we thinking trying to stuff this into an hour? I don't understand.
I'm not really sure, but here's the thing. Like, I feel like if you're going to build a product and you sit around at your staff meeting, you're at a company, or you say, Jason, let's get together and we're going to build a plugin. I think if we started with those 4 questions, it would help us build a better product. If we said, how are we going to market this? It would help us if we could sit down and answer those questions in our branding doc as a marketing team, as somebody who's marketing a product, because that's our audience. Is if we answer those questions, we could basically have 70% of our brand standards document done.
And that's why I put this together. It's also why I've written a very short 9,000 word article that will be published somewhere very soon.
They asked you to get shorter, you dropped like what, 157 words?
Yeah. And then it became longer because I was like, oh, there's another example. Hold on, I'll shorten it. And then, oops, I added 500 words to it.
Oops, I did it again. Was really about you editing yourself.
Yeah, it's this is why I need editors. But
I feel like that could be an actual item.
Yeah, this is the point. This is what I'm trying to drive through. So I've worked on this idea for over 2 years now to try to figure out a way of introducing ethics into the tech community, all aspects of the tech community, in such a way that people can easily go through this without having to understand. Like, you can read 10 books on virtue ethics and still not fully understand what the hell is going on, because it's very confusing. And we've had 3,000 years to do this, so we've just written too much crap, right? I was doing research for this. I'm like, oh my God, why is there so much stuff written about this? And it's so hard to read.
Because philosophers have to write to keep their tenure.
Like there are people like me who will write sentences that are literally the length of a page, right? Because we like that. Because it contains so much information. So I wanted to condense it into something short and meaningful that people can take and use. And what I want to see is people say, let's try this. Let's try to start from this idea of we are building a world for our end user. What kind of world are we building for them, and what kind of capabilities do we want to grant them? And then run up this bridge and figure out like the consequences and your duties and what type of person you become and all these things before you make the final decision to roll it out. Because I truly believe that used this way, ethics is not a wet blanket on creativity. It's actually a hearth that keeps the creativity from burning down the house.
Not just a hearth, though, but I feel like it also could be a prompt.
Yeah. It allows you to thinking about it allows you to think about what you're doing in such a way that you're not accidentally doing something bad, right? Like making Facebook addictive accidentally and then ending up skewing elections as a result, right? Had some more thinking gone into that early on to look at what type of world is created when you make a social media tool addictive might not be the end result you want. So I'm not saying that this tool would have stopped it from happening.
No, right.
But I'm saying when those decisions were made, there would be a better thought process that people went through before they made those decisions that then they can then go back to and say, what did we do wrong here? And how did we end up in this place? And what should we do next time to make sure it doesn't happen again?
Yeah, that's a really good way to end. So it's time for our new segment, Tool or Tip of the Week. Since I'm the slacker, I'll start. It really isn't that, but I am loving HemingwayApp.com again. I just feel like it really helps with the writing. And I've been using that to write better meta descriptions because it counts the characters. It helps me see if I'm being too passive in my writing. So HemingwayApp.com.
Awesome. Do you have anything, Morten?
You go first. I need to think about this. I have 3 different things in my head right now.
Okay. I'm trying to pull it up here, but I'll tell you it and then I'll find the information for it and get it into the show notes. So I'm still on this whole kick of using SetApp to kind of find really cool apps and stuff. And if you look a couple episodes back, I talked a little bit about SetApp and how it's like the iTunes store or whatever for applications and stuff. And so one of the apps that's not in there that I really wish was in there is one called Magnet. And what Magnet does is it allows you to move items around on the screen, almost like as if you're on something called a Windows computer. But what it allows you to do is move a window close to the edge of the screen, and then it expands it or pushes it to one side or the other side. And there's all
like
these
Snap.
customizations and stuff. Yeah, exactly.
That I use all the time on my Windows computer and hate that it's not on my Mac.
It's totally there. So it's if you go look on magnet.crowdcafe.com, and I'll have that in the show notes. You guys can go take a look at that. It's awesome. It's free. You just download it and use it. It's amazing. I love it.
Cool.
That's mine.
So can I give you two things?
Of course you can.
I'll give you an app and I'll give you something to read.
Question yourself. Well, is it good for the common good, Morten?
It is.
So making the world a better place.
I teach a class and the students are like, you laugh like a crazy person. And my wife's like, that's accurate. You're like, anyway. So the app that I use the most across my computer and my phone and everything else is Pocket.
Pocket,
I believe the URL is getpocket.com, getpocket.io or something like that. There's a specific reason. Well, there's two reasons. So the idea of Pocket is you go to see an article or a video or whatever, and you go, oh, cool. And you just tag it. So I have a little bookmarklet in my browser, and I can just quickly tag it. It gets saved into Pocket, and I can go retrieve it later. So basically, anytime people post something on some social media, I'm like, I should read this. I just dump it into Pocket, and I tag it, and then I can read it later. And it has a bunch of features, like you can share and all this other stuff that I don't really use it. Now, the reason why I use it is because I see a lot of stuff I want to read, but I also have dyslexia, so it takes forever for me to read things. And I've discovered that it's very hard for me to read content on the web because it's often split up with ads and it has a bunch of distracting stuff and the typography is bad and everything. So what Pocket does is it strips out all the ads and everything and just gives you the text instead. So if you go to the Pocket app, you can read content. The cool thing is, in the Pocket app on your phone, it also has a text-to-speech function. So you can go in and say, can you read this to me? And then I'll just read it back to you.
Seriously?
So I can go to any website, tag it on Pocket, and then I can get my phone to read it back to me. So I go out running and I can just get it to read it back to me. And that's not all. If you have a Kobo e-reader, the Kobo e-reader links to your Pocket account. So you can read content from the web in e-reader format. And then you can control it just like you control any other text on an e-reader. So you can set your own font, you can set your font sizes, you can do all the stuff. So I basically tag stuff on the internet I want to read, put it onto my e-reader and read it in bed, or I listen to it when I'm out running, thanks to Pocket. So it's a pretty awesome app.
That's cool.
Because I have the Bible do that to me. My Bible app does that. It reads it. Because I'm done reading. I've looked at the computer all day long. My eyeballs don't want to read one more thing.
Yeah,
do you find yourself buying the premium version, or are you using the free version of it?
I have not bought the premium version because I don't currently. I don't even know what it gives me. What I get from Pocket right now is what I need. I might buy it just because I think it's such a good app that I want to support them. But I like the way I use it. I don't need any more features, and I have no idea what the premium thing does. But I've considered buying it. Now, I wanted to suggest a piece of reading for everyone. It has nothing to do with ethics. It has nothing to do with apps. It is one of the most interesting and mind-opening articles I think I've read on the web in the past couple of years. It is an article called Virtual Reality as Possibility Space, which sounds very... right. By a woman named Monica Bielskite. It is the reason why you should read it is it looks at the whole idea of futurism and how we think about what the future is going to look like from a different angle than I think I've ever seen before. And it looks at this concept of the way that we constantly display the future as this dystopian, dark horror show with like lights everywhere, and it shapes us, right? If we go back to the ethics thing, it shapes our future because we say that's what the future is going to be, so it ends up being that way. But we don't have to do that at all. We can do things a completely different way and think about it differently. And Monica does, among other things, art direction for movies. She did a bunch of art direction for Ghost in the Shell that was never used. And when you look at the art direction she made for Ghost in the Shell, which is in this article, you can see what that movie could have looked like. And you can see how that would have created a different world and created a different understanding for us of what the future is going to be like. And that's why it's relevant to people like us who build stuff on the web, because every time we make a decision, we're making a decision on behalf of our end users, and we are making the future for them. And if we start thinking about not just what everyone thinks the future is going to look like, but what we want the future to look like, not just for ourselves, but for the people we make solutions for, then we can drive a better future forward. And this article captures that concept in a really nice way. And it's very provocative in that way, and has a bunch of great links. So yeah, go read it.
I have a question for you, Morten.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have a VR helmet in that booth that you're in?
No.
And you don't? Come on.
I don't.
Are you kidding me? You have to have a VR helmet in that booth.
I'm in the process of obtaining one. I'll tell you why I don't have one.
Why is that?
Because I'm extremely paranoid and I can't get past the notion of basically blindfolding and deafing myself in a room and then not knowing what's happening around. But I need to do it because I have to get deeper into it. But
It's like
if your next question is, have you messed around with WebVR or WebXR as it's called now, then the answer is yes.
Or VRML from like way back in the day, back when I was getting into this stuff. No, my other one is are you excited about Ready Player One?
That's a very difficult thing. So I read the book.
Difficult question.
Okay.
I read the book. I find that the book is very. It paints a specific. It is a very specific understanding of, geek culture. It's very focused on this particular type of geek. And I fear that this movie will just do what Monica's talking about, which is just build this standard view of everything. There are concepts in the book I really like. The overall execution of it gets really frustrating. I'm very curious to see in the movie, like I'm going to see it. I'm very curious to see how they handle the licensing for literally every single thing that ever happened in the 80s, because the licensing deals for that must have been nightmarish to just get. But I fear that it's going to be another dystopian, male-dominated, dumb movie. That's so we'll see, But this is my crazy feminist agenda leaking through again. So I'll just I'm concerned, but not necessarily for that movie. I just don't think it'll bring anything new to a conversation that we should be having around how the world is going to look once everyone straps glasses on their faces.
And how many years is it going to take for Gutenberg to look that good in VR? Come on.
Well, I think that WebVR, as we know it today, is not what WebVR is going to be a year from now, and definitely not what it's going to be that makes it into a big thing. That said, that entire concept of XR, which is MR, VR, AR, all these things, is coming like lightning fast. Oh, they are pushing it so hard. I mean, did you see that thing with the glasses, with the lasers that shoot into your retina? Yeah. So crazy. I've been saying that for like 3 years, that they're going to build these things. And everyone's been like, no, they're not going to. That's like 20 years into the future. No, they have built it. It's happening. So
as somebody who ponied up
about that now.
As somebody who ponied up $1,500 for Google Glass, expecting that type of thing and not getting that type of thing. Yep. That was the very first teeny little step. Beep, little bitty. Let's make the clock show up on your face. Well, Morten, thank you very much for hanging out with us, for talking with us a little bit about some stuff, going ridiculously deep. And I'm sorry we didn't give you 4 hours to be able to kind of go through all these things. I go to my
room and think about what you just said.
Right? Well, luckily for you and luckily for everyone else, we hit the record button and you're able to watch this and listen to this later. So thank you very much for all the folks that were hanging out in the chat room. We really appreciate it. And very much so, thank you for all the folks that helped us out with our show notes. Our show notes is what allows people to find this stuff on the internet and be able to bring them in and be able to listen to all this great content, including content that Morten did for us today. So thank you very much. Morten, where can people find you and all the cool things that you do on the internet?
The easiest place to find me is on Twitter at Morten, because that's my name. That's MOR10 Morten. I also have a blog where I infrequently write things. It's at morten.com, just to make it easy. And all my courses are on LinkedIn Learning and lynda.com. If you want to watch one of them, you go to linkedin.com, click on the Learning button in the top right-hand corner, and you're brought into the world of LinkedIn Learning, where you can learn everything you want for a reasonable price.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time, and thank you all for enjoying this great topic that we had here, and I really appreciate it. You have a good rest of your day. See y'all later. Bye-bye.